Good evening from Westminster, where for the first time in nearly 40 years, the House of Commons has been sitting on a Saturday in the midst of the political crisis which surrounds the Brexit process. This was expected to be the day that MPs delivered their verdict on the New Deal agreed by Boris Johnson, but earlier this afternoon, the House of Commons voted to delay its decision. As a result, the Prime Minister has written to the EU tonight, as required by law, asking for another Brexit extension. He said he was not daunted and still planned to take the UK out of the European Union by the end of the month. We start tonight with our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, on the day that MPs backed another delay to the Brexit process.
Before it was official, the moves in the middle, then the cheers on the right.
Order!
Showed Boris Johnson was thwarted.
The ayes to the right, 322. The noes to the left, 306.
By a margin of 16, MPs said not never to his deal, but not today, not yet.
So the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Unlock!
He's obliged by law now to ask the EU for delay, but he'll kick and scream.
I will tell our friends and colleagues in the EU exactly what I have told everyone in the last 88 days that I've served as Prime Minister, that further delay would be bad for this country, bad for our European Union and bad for democracy.
Warnings of big trouble, though, if he wants to frustrate the law.
Today is an historic day for Parliament because it said it will not be blackmailed by a Prime Minister who is apparently prepared once again to defy a law passed by this Parliament.
And any failure of a Prime Minister who thinks he's above the law, well, Prime Minister, you'll find yourself in court.
But that letter will arrive by midnight in Brussels tonight, addressed to the President of the EU Council, Donald Tusk. It will say, "I am writing to inform the European Council that the United Kingdom is seeking a further extension. The UK proposes this period should end at 11 p.m. on the 31st of January 2020. But number 10 is tonight bound to enrage their critics, because the Prime Minister will not sign that letter, and he'll send a second alongside, maintaining his argument that a delay would be a mistake and should be avoided at all costs. From early this morning, this was always going to be a huge and fraught 24 hours. Not a cue for a Saturday match, but for Parliament. Would MPs just rush headlong into more confusion? The tensions torn by the referendum in plain view, but many of them agonising, genuinely wondering what the best thing to do, even stretching family ties. For the Prime Minister, though, only one aim: to try to force this to a conclusion any way he could.
Statement, the Prime Minister.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, today this House has a historic opportunity to show the same breadth of vision as our European neighbours, the same ability, resolve to reach beyond past disagreements by getting Brexit done.
Decrying attempts by MPs to postpone saying yes or no legally to the deal until all the laws that go along with it are passed too.
Further delay is pointless, expensive and deeply corrosive of public trust.
Labour, though, resistant not just to the deal.
This government cannot be trusted and these benches will not be duped.
But denying too Boris Johnson any chance to move forward.
Labour is not prepared to sell out the communities that we represent. And we will not back this sell-out deal.
Just as the former Prime Minister found, though, there's a range of opposition parties who'll rage against Brexit.
A deal that would see Scotland shafted by this United Kingdom government.
Today, hundreds of thousands of people will be outside demanding a final say in a people's vote.
How could Plaid Cymru ever support his billionaires' Brexit? This deal takes a wrecking ball to our social and environmental standards.
And without his Northern Irish allies on board, the Prime Minister simply couldn't be sure of the numbers.
Rather than a great deal, this will do a great deal of damage to the Union.
It will.
Look, though, who is coming to help. With a joke.
Standing here, I have a distinct sense of déjà vu.
I know how you feel.
And a rebuke to those who voted against her, now planning to do the same to Boris Johnson. Remember, though, once upon a time, that included him.
When this House voted overwhelmingly to give the choice of our membership of the EU to the British people, did we really mean it? I think there can only be one answer to that, and that is yes, we did mean it, because if this Parliament did not mean it, then it is guilty of the most egregious con trick on the British people.
But there's a sprinkling of Labour MPs who want this done.
We will be forced, even if a deal is approved, to seek an extension to the 31st of January, underlying that the sponsors of the Benn Act had only one motivation, and that was to delay Brexit and stop it.
But it's not over, not yet.
306.
Crowds who want another referendum are delighted that the delay gives them a new chance to stop Brexit. But frustration and nerves on the other side.
But we've always been clear it's got to be Brexit for the whole of the United Kingdom. Can't be Northern Ireland left behind.
Remain or leave. If they've just had enough, they want us to get this done. And I'm astonished by the kind of anger that's beginning to boil up. For God's sake, get it done. So they're turning their attention on Parliament.
The Prime Minister's allies wanted today to be at least the beginning of the end, a conclusion. But look at this. MPs and ministers protected by the police from protesters on their way out.
There's nothing going on.
There's nothing final about what's happened today. Animosity still all around.
And here we are outside the Palace of Westminster, and Laura is with me at the end of this rather turbulent day, Laura. Tonight, not one letter sent, but 2 letters sent.
And a covering note. So, in fact, the government has tonight sent 3 different documents to Brussels. One of them, an official copy of what was in the Benn Act, that act that went through Parliament, that will say the UK is requesting an extension, another delay to Brexit. But the Prime Minister is already tonight enraging his critics because he has refused to sign that letter. In fact, I'm told they've sent a photocopy and an email to Donald Tusk, the President of the EU Council. Alongside that, there's a covering note from Sir Tim Barrow, who's a civil servant, explaining that they're just sending a copy from the Act. And with that, a second letter, a political message to the EU from Boris Johnson, maintaining his argument that a delay would be a mistake and asking them to ask Parliament to reconsider their decision today and to get on with this as soon as possible. You can hear tonight already, it's definitely controversial.
Indeed, and I'm just wondering, therefore, what you think, Laura, this means for next week's events.
I think it means it's going to be extremely messy, not just because there'll be a fight raging about these letters and whether or not Boris Johnson is trying to circumvent the law. There's already a court case due on Monday in Edinburgh looking at all of these issues, and I think this is, you know, it's heading straight for the court, and it may very quickly end up in the Supreme Court around the corner here, which made such a momentous decision not so long ago. But from a political point of view, this window there is now gives Boris Johnson's opponents what they see as a chance to cause as much trouble as they possibly can, to try to maybe get that second referendum some of them so desire, or just to try to slam the brakes on the Prime Minister's project. But for number 10, they're going to keep trying. They're going to try another vote on Monday and then maybe another vote on Tuesday. The difficulty for them is this process is getting more and more tangled up. And because of that, we've said it before too long, this is probably going to maybe be resolved by a general election.
OK, Laura, once again, thank you very much. Laura Kunsberg there, our political editor, with her latest analysis. So to recap, the parliamentary vote on the Prime Minister's Brexit deal, which we'd been expecting today, might now take place early next week, as Laura was suggesting there. It's yet another complication for Boris Johnson and the government to tackle as they try to introduce all the legislation necessary to make Brexit happen. Our political correspondent Ben Wright has been looking at what might happen in the days ahead.
Ministers never tire of saying it's time to get Brexit done. But leaving the EU was always going to be a hugely complex and time-consuming process, and it is far from being over. This is how the next few days and even years might unfold. Boris Johnson and the EU have agreed a new withdrawal deal, the terms of divorce. The Prime Minister wanted MPs to approve it in principle today, but they haven't. And so, after this setback for the government, it needs to change tack again. Next week, ministers will publish the withdrawal agreement bill. That is the legislation which puts the deal into law. Expect an early battle over its timetabling as well as its content. There'll be many votes over many days, and the government may even ask MPs to back the Brexit deal in principle again as soon as Monday. The government still wants the bill to be law by October the 31st and for the UK to leave the EU then. But after today, all that could slip. Let's look even further ahead. A whole new phase of Brexit will begin if and when the UK leaves the EU with a deal. A transition period during which little actually changes. This is the time both sides are meant to hammer out their future relationship on trade, security and more. Ministers will set out their negotiating aims to Parliament, and then the talking with Brussels begins again. This transition period will last until the end of December 2020, but could be extended for another 2 years if both sides agree. Some Tory MPs hate that idea, and today Boris Johnson said he wouldn't want that either. But complex trade deals can take several years to negotiate. The deal MPs are arguing about now sets out how the UK leaves the European Union, but explains relatively little about what comes next. That will be the focus of wrangling and negotiation for a long time yet.
Well, that was Ben Wright there with his analysis of what lies ahead. Well, while MPs were debating inside the chamber of the House of Commons, thousands of demonstrators were outside, packing the streets of central London, calling for a public vote on any deal that is agreed. The protest, organised by the People's Vote campaign, converged on Parliament Square, just behind me, as our home editor, Mark Easton, reports now.
It had been billed as a march to give confident voice to those who want the Brexit debate put back to the people. But as they set out, the mood was more resolute, anxious, even pessimistic.
I think it's too late. Yeah, it is. I think it is a bit too late, but we're just here to try and give it a go. Yeah.
The argument could be decided before you get to Parliament Square.
It could. I know it could, and we all know that, and it's in the back of our minds, but we are going to still keep marching and saying what we believe in.
The organisers claim 1 million people snaked their way from Marble Arch, that symbol of British triumph against the continental might of Napoleon, past Wellington's home at Hyde Park Corner, past Nelson on his column in Trafalgar Square, the architecture of the nation's capital reflecting historical tensions with European neighbours.
A significant part of the country may just want to get a deal done, get on to the next stage of the Brexit process. But these are the faces of people who were saying, not in my name, or not yet, or not at all.
Details of every growl and groan from the debate inside the House of Commons rippled through the crowds outside as they headed towards Parliament. This long-planned event provided a noisy soundtrack to attempts by government to bring the Brexit argument to an end before the march reached its destination. Pictures from inside the Palace of Westminster were relayed to the vast crowd watching outside, and then the moment when it was clear there would be no Brexit deal today.
The news from Parliament is greeted less with rejoicing, I think, and more with relief. The long march that they hope leads from one people's vote to another people's vote, well, that can go on.
It's not a defeat. We're still in the fight.
At least the vote gives us hope that something can be slowed down.
Slowed down?
And the slower it goes, the better.
It means the agony continues, though, doesn't it?
I know, yes, that's boring, but that's the position that he's put us in, so...
But what will the final destination look like? For people on all sides of the argument, that remains frustratingly unclear. Mark Easton, BBC News, Westminster.
So, as we've heard, a set of documents has been sent tonight from the government to Brussels, to the European Union. And Katya Adler, our Europe editor, is in Brussels. Katya, what's the reaction they're likely to be?
Well, first of all, I can confirm that the letters have arrived here in Brussels. Let's take a look at a tweet from Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council. He's the man who represents all EU leaders here in Brussels. He says he's received the letters from Boris Johnson and he will now be able to start consulting EU leaders as to the what next. I can tell you, Hugh, that here in the EU there is zero appetite to drag out the Brexit process any further at all. In fact, we heard from Emmanuel Macron, the French president, again this evening saying he didn't think that an extension was in anybody's interest. And the fact that the Prime Minister has sent an accompanying letter tonight expressing again his opposition to an extension, that will help EU leaders drag their feet a little bit. First and foremost, they're going to look to the Prime Minister to make good on his promise to them just 2 days ago here in Brussels that their newly negotiated Brexit deal would definitely pass through Parliament. And time, relatively speaking, is on Boris Johnson and the EU side, because the Brexit deadline is not today, it's at the end of the month under EU law. And EU leaders want to keep the pressure on MPs. They want to help focus their minds before they say, yes, you've absolutely got a lot of time. In fact, if they wanted to, EU leaders could hold their emergency Brexit summit to decide a new extension even on the morning of the 31st of October. But all of that said, Hugh, if push comes to shove and time is running out and no deal looks like the only option, then after all these years now of Brexit process, 2 prime ministers, 2 Brexit deals, I cannot see EU leaders at this point closing the door in the UK's face. I think they are then, at that point, likely to grant another extension, but probably as short as possible, and they'll want to know what it's for. Is it to pass final legislation, to hold a second referendum, a general election, or even a referendum on their newly signed-off Brexit deal?
Katya, many thanks once again. Katya Adler there for us, our Europe editor in Brussels.